A lover's lane of death. It begins with the sound of the river. The Colonial Parkway, a quiet 23-mile stretch of road winding between Yorktown and Jamestown, Virginia, was meant to be a place of peace. Couples came here to watch the sunset over the York River, to escape the noise of the world. But in the late 1980s, it became something else entirely, a hunting ground. Between 1986 and 1989, at least 8 young lovers vanished or were found murdered along this road. Their deaths were brutal, precise, and linked by one chilling constant: the intimacy of the places they were killed. According to official records, it began in October 1986. 2 park rangers discovered a white 1980 Honda Civic parked along a scenic overlook. Inside were the bodies of Kathy Thomas, a 27-year-old former U.S. Naval Academy graduate, and her girlfriend, Rebecca Dowski, a 21-year-old student from the College of William and Mary. Their throats had been slashed with such force that it nearly decapitated them. Their car had been doused in diesel fuel, as if someone intended to burn the evidence. But for reasons no one could explain, the fire was never lit. At first, investigators believed it was an isolated attack, perhaps a hate crime given the couple's relationship. But less than a year later, another couple disappeared: David Knobling, 20, and Robin Edwards, 14. Their bodies were found near the James River, shot execution style. Then, in 1988, Cassandra Hailey and Richard Call, both college students, went missing after a date. Their car was found abandoned at a parkway overlook, doors unlocked, keys inside, wallets untouched. Their bodies were never found. And finally, in 1989, Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer, another young couple, vanished while driving to Virginia Beach. Their car was discovered abandoned at a rest stop. Months later, hunters found their remains deep in the woods, arranged side by side beneath a blanket. 4 pairs, 8 victims, no suspects. The FBI launched one of the largest manhunts in Virginia's history. But what they found was more confusing than clarifying. There were no fingerprints, no signs of robbery, no sexual assault. The killer took nothing except lives. Some believed he was a rogue law enforcement officer, using his badge to lure victims. Others suggested a ritualistic pattern, or even multiple killers working in unison. The Colonial Parkway, once a lover's refuge, had become a corridor of death. Locals began to fear the road after dark. The soft hum of the river, once comforting, now sounded like a warning. Drivers reported seeing ghostly headlights following them through the fog, only to vanish at the next bend. For many, it was as though the land itself had turned against them, a place cursed by the silence of those who died there. According to official records, the Colonial Parkway was built to honor America's history. But by the end of the 1980s, it had written a new kind of story, one paved in blood, secrecy, and fear. The river's first secret. October 12, 1986. A cool autumn night drifted over Virginia's Tidewater region. The Colonial Parkway lay quiet, a ribbon of asphalt slicing through dense forest and shadowed riverbanks. It was a night made for secrecy. No traffic, no lights, only the whisper of the York River brushing against the shore. Somewhere in that darkness, 2 women's lives were ending. According to official records, at 9:30 a.m. the next morning, 2 park rangers noticed a white Honda Civic parked awkwardly off an overlook near Cheatham Annex. The vehicle's windows were fogged, its doors locked. When the rangers approached, they found a sight that would haunt them for decades. The bodies of Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski slumped in the front seat, their throats cut with a precision more surgical than savage. Diesel fuel soaked the interior, and traces of rope suggested restraint. Yet nothing was stolen. Wallets, jewelry, and identification remained untouched. Whoever had done this came not for money, but for power. Kathy and Rebecca had spent the evening together after dinner with friends at William and Mary. Witnesses last saw them near Williamsburg around 11 p.m. When they failed to appear for work the next day, friends contacted police. Investigators initially treated it as a missing persons case, But the crime scene changed everything. It was too deliberate, too controlled. The killer had parked the car facing the river, as if to stage a tableau, a symbol of quiet annihilation. FBI agents examined the site meticulously. The cut marks were consistent with a sharp blade, possibly a marine knife. Tire impressions near the overlook suggested another vehicle, a larger one, maybe a truck or a law enforcement cruiser. Fibers found on the victims did not match anything inside the Honda. There were no defensive wounds. Kathy and Rebecca had not fought back. This implied either they trusted the killer or never saw the attack coming. For the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, the details were chillingly specific. This was control, one profiler later said, not rage. Whoever did this took time. He knew what he wanted to see before he left. The investigation turned toward possible hate crimes, given the couple's same-sex relationship, a factor often met with hostility in the mid-1980s military and Southern communities. Kathy, a former Naval Academy graduate, had left the service after facing harassment. Rebecca was bright, artistic, gentle. Together, they represented a defiance of convention, and that made their murder seem personal to some investigators. But the forensic evidence argued otherwise. This was not passion, it was ritual. Rumors began to swirl in the small college town of Williamsburg. Some whispered about a killer in uniform, a ranger or a police officer using his authority to approach couples on the isolated parkway. The idea gained traction when witnesses reported seeing flashing lights in the area on the night of the murders. Others believed it was someone who knew the victims, a friend, a stalker, or an ex-lover, but every lead faded into fog. By winter, the case had gone cold. The Colonial Parkway grew emptier, avoided by locals. It used to be a place for lovers, one resident told reporters. Now it's a place for ghosts. Even as federal agents continued to patrol the overlooks, the silence of the river held its own kind of defiance. Nature had already begun to reclaim the scene, the leaves falling softly over the last traces of blood, the water carrying whispers downstream. According to official records, the York River kept its secrets, but those who stood there that morning swore they felt it watching, calm, cold, and complicit. The second pair, September 1987. Nearly a year had passed since the brutal murders of Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski. The Colonial Parkway had grown eerily quiet. Few couples visited after dark, and locals whispered that the road was cursed. But fear has a way of fading into routine, and by the end of summer, the stillness of the Virginia woods lulled people into forgetting. That's when the killer struck again. According to official records, on the night of September 19th, David Knobling, age 20, and Robin Edwards, age 14, drove out near the Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge, just off the James River Bridge. They weren't officially a couple, more, two young souls looking for a quiet escape. David was a hardworking, grounded young man with a love for cars and music. Robin was adventurous and impulsive, still more girl than woman. They disappeared sometime after midnight. When their families reported them missing the next day, police assumed they had run off together. 2 days later, the tide proved them wrong. On September 23rd, a jogger discovered David's truck parked near the boat ramp, doors unlocked, radio still playing softly under the hum of insects. His wallet and Robin's purse were inside. Not far from the vehicle, along the muddy shoreline, searchers found two bodies partially concealed by reeds. David and Robin had both been shot in the head at close range. The positioning of the bodies suggested they were ordered to kneel before execution. No signs of sexual assault, no robbery, only precision. The similarities to the previous year's murders were impossible to ignore. A couple, an isolated lover's spot, a lack of motive, a crime scene soaked in silence. The FBI reclassified the case as a potential continuation of the Colonial Parkway killings. The press dubbed the unknown assailant the Parkway Predator. For investigators, the new case deepened the riddle. Unlike the first murders, this one involved a firearm instead of a knife. But the underlying control was the same. No chaos, no struggle. It was as if the killer adapted methods depending on circumstance, changing tools but not purpose. It's a chess game. One profiler noted, "He makes his move, then waits for us to chase shadows." The forensic trail led nowhere. Ballistics matched no known weapon. Tire impressions near the truck indicated a second vehicle, possibly larger, consistent with law enforcement or a pickup truck. Witnesses recalled seeing flashing blue lights along the parkway that night, an echo of the rumors that the killer might be impersonating or actually be a police officer. The possibility chilled both investigators and the public. When news of the killings broke, panic swept through Tidewater communities. Parents forbade their children from driving out after dark. Couples canceled weekend trips. The Colonial Parkway was no longer a romantic escape, it had become a corridor of fear. Yet the killer, whoever he was, vanished once again without a trace. Months later, when the tide receded, investigators recovered a single .22 caliber shell casing lodged in the mud. It offered no fingerprints, no unique markings, only confirmation that the murders had been deliberate. The casing was sealed in an evidence bag, labeled simply, Case 87459, Colonial Parkway. Behind the official paperwork, detectives felt something intangible binding the crimes together. The killer had changed location, changed method, but not ritual. Both pairs had been silenced, arranged, and abandoned in places meant for intimacy. "He kills where love exists," one FBI agent said, and that's what makes him feel powerful. According to official records, the second murders bore no direct connection to the first, but those who walked the banks of the James River could feel it, the same precision, the same calm, and the same predator watching from the trees. The vanished students. April 1988. Spring had come early to Williamsburg, and the Colonial Parkway seemed to breathe again after the long winter. The dogwoods were blooming, the river calm, the air warm enough for young couples to drive out and watch the stars. But by the end of that month, the parkway would once again become a place of fear, a reminder that something unseen still haunted Virginia's quiet roads. According to official records, Richard Keith Call, 20, and Cassandra Sandy Hailey, 18, were students at Christopher Newport College. On the night of April 9th, they attended a party with friends in Newport News. They left around 1:30 a.m., heading toward the Colonial Parkway. Neither of them was seen again. The next morning, police discovered Keith's 1982 Toyota Celica parked at an overlook near Yorktown. Doors unlocked, wallets and clothing inside. The keys were still in the ignition. The seats were pushed back, as if someone else had been there. But the car was empty. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, no footprints, no tire marks leading away. The crime scene felt eerie in its stillness, almost staged. "It looked like they had just stepped out to stretch their legs," said one investigator. But they never returned. When the search began, it spread across the peninsula, boats, helicopters, and dogs combing the shoreline. Days passed, then weeks. Nothing. No bodies, no evidence. Not even a shoe. It was as if the couple had been erased from existence. For the families, it was worse than death. It was a question without an answer. The similarities to the earlier killings were undeniable. A young couple, an isolated parkway overlook. Personal items untouched, but for the first time, the killer had left no bodies. Some investigators wondered if it was a different person altogether. Others believed it was a deliberate evolution, a predator refining his craft, learning to make people vanish completely. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit studied the case closely. The killer's psychological pattern seemed to oscillate between exhibition and concealment. In the first murders, the bodies had been found almost symbolically posed. In the second, hidden but recoverable. Now, in the third, there was nothing. "He's testing boundaries," one profiler wrote. "He's learning what it takes to make them disappear." Rumors again turned to law enforcement. The possibility that the killer was using the authority of a badge to approach couples under the guise of safety became harder to ignore. Reports emerged of drivers being pulled over by unmarked vehicles along the parkway, questioned by a man flashing lights, then waved off into the night. One woman recalled a chilling detail. The man's voice was calm, polite, but without warmth. "He knew too much," she said, like he'd practiced every word. Despite extensive investigation, no trace of Keith or Sandy ever surfaced. Their families clung to hope, leaving porch lights on for years, refusing to believe they were gone. But the silence of the parkway offered no comfort. It seemed to absorb all questions, reflecting only stillness back. As months turned to years, their case became the ghost story of Tidewater. Teenagers whispered about the couple who disappeared into the mist. Locals said that if you drove the parkway at midnight, you could still see headlights flicker behind you, vanishing just before the next curve. According to official records, the third case offered no bodies, no blood, and no closure. But those who drive the parkway at night know better. Some absences are louder than screams. The last pair, September 1989. Virginia was between seasons, the humid breath of summer still clinging to the trees. The first chill of autumn creeping into the air. It was the kind of weather that carried both memory and warning. For the people of Tidewater, the Colonial Parkway murders had become an open wound that refused to close. And then, just as fear began to fade, another couple disappeared. According to official records, Anna Maria Phelps, 18, and Daniel Lauer, 21, were traveling from Amelia County to Virginia Beach. Daniel had recently moved in with Anna Maria's sister, and the trip was meant to be short. Just a ride to pick up some belongings. They were last seen around midnight on September 4th, 1989, driving Daniel's gold 1972 Chevrolet Nova east on Interstate 64. When they didn't arrive, their families feared the worst. 2 days later, police found the Nova abandoned at a rest stop off the I-64 exit near New Kent County, less than 40 miles from where Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski had died 3 years earlier. The car was parked neatly, keys inside, windows up, no sign of a struggle. But something felt wrong. The vehicle wasn't where they should have stopped, and its gas tank was still half full. Search teams combed the surrounding forest for weeks, but the woods kept their silence. Then, in October, a group of hunters stumbled upon skeletal remains less than a mile from the rest area. They were side by side, partially covered by a blanket. The bones showed signs of blunt force trauma and possible stabbing, but decomposition made the cause of death impossible to confirm. The positioning of the bodies, once again, suggested deliberate staging. The connection to the Colonial Parkway murders was immediate and undeniable. The circumstances, young couple, isolated highway, no robbery, no sexual assault, matched the established pattern. But the location was different. The victims had been found just off the interstate, not the parkway itself. The killer, it seemed, was expanding his hunting ground. Investigators from the FBI and Virginia State Police worked the case with renewed urgency. They reviewed old files, re-examined forensic samples, and questioned anyone who might have seen a light-colored vehicle parked at the rest stop that night. One trucker recalled seeing an unmarked car idling nearby with its headlights off. Another described a man in a uniform talking to the couple hours before their disappearance, but his account shifted under pressure. "He looked like a cop," the trucker said, "or someone who wanted you to think he was." The discovery of Anna Maria and Daniel's remains brought a grim symmetry to the series. 4 couples, 8 victims, 3 years, and then nothing. After 1989, the killings stopped as suddenly as they had begun. The FBI profilers could not agree on why. Some believed the murderer died, was imprisoned for another crime, or moved elsewhere. Others thought he had simply achieved what he wanted, control over fear itself. "He doesn't need to kill again," one profiler said. "He knows the legend will do the rest." The rest stop became a shrine of sorts. Travelers left flowers, photographs, and handwritten notes beside the trees. Parents warned their children never to pull over at night. The Virginia State Police eventually increased patrols, but the feeling of dread never lifted. The killer had vanished, but his silence had weight. It filled the empty highways like fog. For the families of Anna Maria and Daniel, closure was a hollow word. "We wanted answers," Daniel's mother said, but all we got was quiet. That quiet stretched for decades, echoing through documentaries, podcasts, and cold case files that tried to reconstruct what really happened on that lonely stretch of road. According to official records, the series ended in 1989. But those who drive the Virginia highways at night know the truth. The road never forgets, and neither does what walks beside it. The killer's signature. By 1990, the Colonial Parkway Murders had entered the annals of American criminal history, not as a closed case, but as a haunting riddle. 8 victims, 4 pairs, 3 years. Each seeing bore its own grim fingerprint, and yet, to those who looked closer, there was a rhythm to the violence. It was not random, it was deliberate. And somewhere between the blood and the silence lay the killer's true identity. According to official records, the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit took full control of the case in late 1989. The agents began building what they called a behavioral signature, a composite portrait not of what the killer looked like, but of who he was. The profile that emerged was chilling. A white male, likely between 25 and 40 at the time of the murders, intelligent, methodical, confident. He was someone comfortable in authority, possibly law enforcement or military. He knew the roads, the routines, and the psychology of his prey. He was also a voyeur. The couple's intimate settings, their quiet cars parked under moonlight, suggested the killer was drawn not to sex, but to its vulnerability. He invaded moments of affection and turned them into executions. It was domination through intrusion. He doesn't just kill them, one profiler said. He kills the space between them. Each crime scene demonstrated elements of control, vehicles neatly parked, possessions left untouched, no evidence of robbery or chaos. The killer's use of diesel fuel in the first case and a blanket in the last hinted at ritual cleansing, a need to erase traces of contact, perhaps symbolic. The alternating use of knife and gun showed adaptability, not inconsistency. He's not changing weapons because he's confused, explained a forensic analyst. He's experimenting. He's learning. The idea that the killer might be a law enforcement officer gained traction quickly. Multiple witnesses had described unmarked cars, flashing lights, and interactions with men who carried themselves with authority. The killer, it seemed, could disarm suspicion before a weapon was ever drawn. They trusted him enough to roll down the window, one investigator said. That's all it took. Agents scoured the rosters of police departments, park rangers, and security contractors across the Tidewater region. They found men with disciplinary issues, ex-military personnel with violent histories, even one ranger quietly transferred after a string of harassment complaints. Yet every lead fell apart under scrutiny. Alibis checked out. Evidence was circumstantial, and the deeper the agents dug, the more resistance they met. The wall wasn't made of silence, said one retired detective. It was made of protection. The psychological portrait that emerged painted the killer as a hybrid, part predator, part perfectionist. He likely kept trophies, not physical objects, but memories, revisiting his crimes mentally as a form of pleasure and control. The intervals between murders, 6 to 12 months, suggested a man who killed when life allowed it. Perhaps he was married, with children, blending into his community. Perhaps he wore a badge by day and hunted by night. There were theories of duality, even partnership. Some profilers argued that 2 killers were involved, one dominant, one submissive, alternating control over the crimes. Others saw it as a lone figure evolving, learning from each murder. But the essence was the same: intelligence without empathy, control without conscience. A man who viewed human life not as sacred, but as a fleeting experiment. Despite years of analysis, no definitive suspect ever emerged. The killer's true signature was not in the physical evidence, it was in the consistency of the fear he left behind. The ability to manipulate not just his victims, but an entire region's sense of safety, was itself his final act of power. According to official records, the killer left no trace. But those who read the pattern know his handwriting, calm, meticulous, and written in the dark corners of America's most trusted institutions, the badge and the shadow. The deeper the FBI dug into the Colonial Parkway murders, the more the case began to resemble a hall of mirrors. Every reflection revealed something familiar: authority, procedure, trust, and yet behind it lurked corruption, confusion, and fear. The theory that the killer might have been a law enforcement officer had started as speculation. By 1991, it had become a whisper that no one dared to say aloud in official meetings. Too many things didn't add up. Too many details suggested that someone on the inside knew exactly how to stay invisible. According to official records, several leads emerged that hinted at institutional involvement. Unmarked vehicles seen near the murder sites were consistent with local police and park ranger patrols. Reports from witnesses described a man with a calm, commanding tone, someone who sounded like he belonged there. The FBI's own internal memos acknowledged the possibility. Perpetrator may possess law enforcement training or credentials. Potential impersonation or active service status cannot be ruled out. That single sentence, buried in a classified report, changed everything. When agents began cross-referencing personnel records, they ran into unexpected resistance. Files went missing. Requests for cooperation were delayed or quietly denied. In one case, an officer with a history of violence resigned abruptly after being questioned. His service weapon was a .22 caliber pistol, the same type used in one of the murders. The ballistics test results, however, were never released. The official explanation, inconclusive. The unofficial one, suppressed. Inside the Bureau, tensions rose. Veteran agents who had worked on the case from the beginning began to suspect that someone higher up was obstructing the investigation. Whether out of fear, politics, or self-preservation, it became clear that the Colonial Parkway murders had crossed a line that few wanted to follow. Every time we got close to something, one retired investigator later said, someone shut the door. Rumors spread through Virginia's law enforcement community like wildfire. Some claimed the killer was an ex-cop fired for misconduct. Others whispered that he was still active, protected by his peers. There was talk of a small group, a fraternity of men linked by shared secrets, who might have used their badges to lure and silence victims. The theory was never proven, but the fear it created fractured trust between departments. No one knew who to believe, recalled a detective. We started watching each other instead of the killer. As the 1990s began, public confidence in the investigation eroded completely. The FBI stopped releasing updates. Press conferences grew shorter, vaguer, and colder. Families of the victims accused authorities of indifference, even complicity. "They're protecting one of their own," said one grieving father on live television, "and our children are paying the price." Years later, when internal documents were declassified, they revealed missing evidence: a section of rope from the first crime scene, a fiber sample from the second, an entire logbook of ranger patrols from the week Kathy and Rebecca were killed. All gone. Misplaced, destroyed, or simply erased from existence. The coincidences were too many, the mistakes too perfect. In time, even the agents who once believed in the system began to doubt it. If the killer wore a badge, one of them said quietly, then the road to justice ends where it began. The phrase became infamous among cold case investigators, a grim acknowledgement that sometimes the greatest monster is the one hiding in plain sight. According to official records, internal misconduct was never proven, but those who read between the redacted lines know the truth. The killer may not have broken into the system, he may have built it. The road that swallowed evidence. By the early 1990s, the Colonial Parkway murders had become a cold case in everything but name. The investigation still existed on paper. But in reality, it was little more than a ghost haunting file rooms, whispered about at retirement parties, and occasionally revived by new detectives who believed they could solve what their predecessors could not. Yet, every time someone tried to dig deeper, they found less and less. It was as if the case itself was dissolving into the fog that hung over the river. According to official records, dozens of pieces of evidence were either misplaced, damaged, or destroyed between 1990 and 1995. Rope fibers from the first murders, bullet casings from the second, even the recorded 911 calls from nearby witnesses, all gone. The explanations were always administrative: clerical errors, evidence room relocations, flooding, contamination. But for those who had lived the case, the pattern was unmistakable. "Evidence doesn't disappear by accident," said one retired FBI agent. "It disappears when someone wants it gone." The breakdown began with the chain of custody. Each local department had handled its own portion of the investigation, storing evidence separately before forwarding it to federal labs. Somewhere along that line, the trail fractured. Items listed in inventory sheets no longer existed in storage. Labels were mismatched, photos mislabeled. When one forensic technician requested access to the original tire impressions from the Nobbling Edwards case, he was told the negatives had been destroyed in a routine purge. The technician later resigned. But the most disturbing loss came from the first case, the 1986 murders of Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski. The original crime scene photographs, taken by park rangers before FBI arrival, were missing from the archives. The few remaining images showed only fragments of what had been documented that night. "Someone cherry-picked what survived," said an investigator years later. "It's not incompetence, it's curation." There were other anomalies. A section of the Colonial Parkway near Yorktown was repaved in 1991, erasing tire impressions still visible in the soil. Evidence logs from the York County Sheriff's Office listed a blood-stained fabric sample sent to Quantico for testing, but the lab reported never receiving it. When internal auditors tried to trace the item, they found the case file had been reclassified as inactive, then sealed. "It's like the road itself was eating the truth," one detective remarked. Every year, it buried another piece. Public frustration mounted as the victims' families demanded accountability. Mari Phelps, sister of Anna Maria, confronted police during a televised meeting. "If you can't protect the evidence, how can you protect anyone?" Her question hung in the air like an accusation against the entire system. The Bureau issued a brief statement assuring that all remaining materials are secure and accounted for. It was a lie. By the time the case was transferred to cold case status in 1995, more than 40% of physical evidence was either missing or degraded beyond use. DNA technology, which might have offered new hope, was rendered useless without samples to test. The Colonial Parkway had become a perfect storm of negligence and silence. Decades later, when journalists requested access to the case files under the Freedom of Information Act, hundreds of pages were heavily redacted or entirely blank. The official explanation: ongoing investigation. The unofficial reality: there was nothing left to investigate. According to official records, the evidence was lost through time and error. But those who stood on the parkway know better. The road didn't just hide bodies, it swallowed the proof. The pattern of pairs. Forensic analysts love patterns. They are the breadcrumbs that lead from chaos to meaning. In the Colonial Parkway murders, the pattern was not just in the victims, but in the geometry of death itself. 4 pairs, 4 years. 4 distinct but eerily symmetrical acts of violence. Each scene mirrored the others in tone and structure, as though composed by a meticulous mind that viewed killing not as impulse, but as ritual. According to official records, the FBI created a timeline connecting every known detail: the dates, distances, and times between each double homicide. The intervals were nearly perfect, roughly 1 year apart, with each crime committed between late summer and early autumn. It was the season when nights were long but warm, when couples sought privacy along Virginia's scenic roads. The killer had learned his calendar well. "He's not reacting," said one profiler. "He's scheduling." The geography reinforced the ritual. All 4 attacks occurred within a 60-mile radius along the Tidewater region, following the contours of the York and James Rivers. Each location was accessible from the Colonial Parkway or its feeder highways, and each offered privacy with limited exits. For investigators, the map resembled a circuit, an invisible route drawn by someone who knew the terrain intimately. The distances between sites were consistent with a single night's drive. The victims also followed a logic of pairing. Every incident involved two people, one male, one female. Though the first pair, Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski, broke the conventional mold as a same-sex couple, still, the dynamic remained the same: intimacy interrupted. The killer's fixation was not on gender, but on proximity, the emotional bond itself. He doesn't kill individuals, one agent wrote. He kills relationships. The killer's methods shifted, but never strayed far from precision. In the first case, knives. In the second, a firearm. In the third, disappearance. In the fourth, blunt trauma. Each variation was deliberate, yet each scene echoed the same composition: a secluded car, undisturbed possessions, and bodies arranged with care. It was as if the killer was rehearsing something, refining a private performance of control. The lack of sexual assault, robbery, or overt rage stripped the crimes of ordinary motive. What remained was the structure of domination. The FBI's behavioral team theorized that the killer's obsession lay in symmetry and authority. He reenacted the same scenario repeatedly, controlling every variable. The act of murdering couples symbolized an inversion of intimacy. He inserted himself into their private space and replaced affection with fear. He doesn't see them as people, a psychologist observed. He sees them as positions on a chessboard. But the pattern also revealed something unexpected: regression. Each subsequent murder displayed fewer forensic risks, fewer traces. The killer adapted, eliminated weaknesses, and grew invisible. This kind of evolution was rare, even among serial offenders. Most killers became careless over time. This one grew cleaner, colder, more efficient. Then, as suddenly as it began, the pattern ended. 1989. Silence. That silence became its own mystery. Did the killer stop because he was caught for another crime? Did he die? Or had he achieved something that fulfilled the ritual's purpose? Some profilers believed the final murders of Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer were not just acts of violence, but closure, a symbolic end to a cycle only the killer understood. Others believed the pattern might extend beyond Virginia. Similar unsolved murders occurred along remote highways in North Carolina, Maryland, and Delaware in the years following. All shared hallmarks of control, pairing, and absence of motive. Was the Colonial Parkway killer expanding his territory, or had he simply changed his hunting ground? By the late 1990s, analysts referred to him in shorthand, the collector of pairs. It was not an official term, but it captured his essence. A predator who didn't seek death alone, but the precise moment two lives met and extinguished together. To him, perhaps that symmetry was beautiful. According to official records, the killer's motive remains unknown. But the pattern he left behind speaks for itself. Not chaos, not madness, just perfect, practiced order, the haunted investigation. By the time the 1990s ended, the Colonial Parkway Murders had claimed more than the lives of its victims. It had consumed the men and women who hunted the killer. Detectives aged faster, marriages collapsed, and the name of the case itself began to sound like a curse. To work the Parkway meant living with it, carrying its weight in silence, haunted not only by what they found, but by what they could never prove. According to official records, over 70 investigators cycled through the task force between 1986 and 1999. Many left early, citing burnout or health issues. Others stayed until retirement, their desks lined with yellowing photographs of the victims, a private memorial disguised as paperwork. "It wasn't the bodies that got to you," said one former FBI agent. "It was the emptiness. You start seeing the pattern everywhere, in parking lots, headlights, the way people sit together in cars. You start to think he's still out there, watching you back." Some of the earliest investigators became consumed by obsession. One local detective, known for his precision and calm demeanor, began spending nights driving the Parkway alone, parked at the overlooks where the murders had occurred. He recorded hours of tape, describing what he saw and felt, convinced the killer might return. In one recording, recovered years later, his voice cracks. It's like the road breathes. You can feel it remembering. 2 months later, he resigned without explanation. Inside the bureau, morale deteriorated. The endless leads, dead ends, and bureaucratic interference corroded trust. Younger agents referred to the case as the black hole. Files went missing from internal servers. Photographs vanished from storage rooms. One analyst discovered that his digital case summaries had been altered, paragraphs deleted, timestamps changed. "We were chasing a ghost," he said, "that sometimes it felt like the ghost was in our own house." The strain took a psychological toll. Agents developed nightmares, insomnia, and what one bureau psychologist later termed investigative contamination, the blurring of identity between hunter and hunted. Several described dreams in which they sat in the killer's car, waiting, headlights off, watching a young couple through a windshield. After a while, one said, you stop being sure whose eyes you're looking through. A few investigators paid an even higher price. In 1997, a veteran agent named Paul Myers died in a single-car accident on the same stretch of road where the first bodies had been found. The official cause was listed as fatigue, but colleagues claimed he'd been drinking heavily, tormented by guilt and failure. Another, Detective Harold Pennington, retired early after a breakdown during a press briefing. "I can't keep pretending we're getting closer," he said, before leaving the podium mid-sentence. His badge was found days later on a bench overlooking the river. The Bureau eventually disbanded the dedicated task force, folding the case into the cold case division. For some, this was a relief. For others, it felt like surrender. "It wasn't just unsolved," said one retired officer. "It was unforgiven." The murders had become more than evidence. They were an infection that spread through the department, turning clarity into paranoia. Even now, decades later, those who worked the investigation speak cautiously, if at all. They describe the case as cursed, a gravity well of fear that bends the lives of anyone who gets too close. Some still receive anonymous letters, postmarked from Virginia, quoting Bible verses about judgment and sin. One note read simply, "You can't catch what you can't see." According to official records, the investigation stalled due to lack of evidence. But those who walked the parkway at night know the truth. It wasn't the lack of proof that broke them. It was the presence of something they couldn't explain. The families left behind. Long after the headlines faded and the detectives retired, the families remained, the only constant in a case built on vanishing. Their lives became timelines of absence, measured not in years, but in anniversaries. Each one brought another candlelit vigil, another empty press release, another reminder that closure is a word invented for people who have never lost someone to the dark. According to official records, 8 victims are tied to the Colonial Parkway murders. But for the families, those records mean little. They live with what isn't written, the birthdays missed, the voices gone, the photographs fading under sunlit windows. They have become their own archivists, keeping the truth alive, one folder, one memory, one sleepless night at a time. Kathy Thomas's brother, Billy, still drives the parkway every October, placing flowers at the overlook where she and Rebecca Dowski were found. He was once a police officer himself, but after Kathy's death, he left the force. "You spend your life believing the badge means something," he told an interviewer. Then, your sister gets murdered, and suddenly the badge feels like part of the problem. His home, now a private museum of the investigation, is lined with case binders thicker than the FBI's own files. David Nobling's father, Charles, died in 2011, still believing he knew who the killer was. It was someone in uniform, he said repeatedly. His wife, Evelyn, kept every clipping, every note, every photograph. Her living room walls are covered with faces of reporters, detectives, and victims, a collage of persistence and grief. "The road took my boy," she once said, "but it didn't take my memory." For Cassandra Hailey's parents, the pain was quieter but deeper. Without bodies to bury, they were denied even the ritual of mourning. Her mother, Joyce, set 2 chairs on her porch every evening, one for herself, one for her daughter. Just in case she came home, she explained to a journalist in 1998. The chair remains there today, weathered by rain and time. Anna Maria Phelps's sister, Ida, became the de facto spokesperson for all the families. Her voice, brittle but unyielding, carried through countless interviews and vigils. "We're not just fighting for justice," she said. "We're fighting against being forgotten." In 2009, she helped organize a memorial service attended by over 300 people, families, journalists, and retired agents, standing shoulder to shoulder under the weight of unsaid words. The plaque unveiled that day read, "For those who left together and never returned." Over the years, some families grew to distrust the system entirely. They filed Freedom of Information Act requests, hired private investigators, and even created online communities to share leads and theories. One mother, still hopeful after 3 decades, learned computer coding just to track public records herself. "If they won't look," she said, "I will." But the grief had side effects. Marriages crumbled, siblings stopped speaking. Some parents became isolated, their lives orbiting around a single frozen moment in time. The pain was hereditary, passed down like an heirloom of sorrow. "You start to forget who they were," one brother admitted. "They stop being your sister or your friend. They become the case." And yet, despite the silence of law enforcement and the erosion of evidence, the families refuse to give up. Every few years, a new article or documentary reignites attention. Each time, the cycle repeats. Hope, disappointment, anger, silence. The faces grow older, but the grief never changes. /innovative speak. In their resilience lies the last trace of meaning the case still holds. According to official records, the victims' families were informed that the investigation remains open. But those who have waited 30 years for a phone call know the truth. Justice is not a door that opens. It's a road you walk until your legs give out. Echoes of the Parkway. Time has a way of turning horror into folklore. By the dawn of the 2000s, the Colonial Parkway Murders had transcended the realm of unsolved crime and entered something deeper, collective mythology. For a new generation, the case was no longer just about bodies and evidence. It was about fear itself, woven into the American landscape like an invisible scar. According to official records, the Colonial Parkway was designed in the 1930s as a tribute to America's birth, the road that connected Jamestown, Williamsburg, and Yorktown, 3 of the nation's historical pillars. But by the late 20th century, that same route had acquired a darker legacy. Locals renamed it in whispers, the Lover's Lane of Death. Families who once picnicked along its overlooks now locked their car doors after sundown. The name alone evoked a shiver, a reminder that even in the heart of American history, something malevolent could bloom. The murders became a fixture of true crime media. Documentaries on the Discovery Channel and Oxygen Network revisited the case with dramatic recreations and solemn narrators. Podcasts dissected every rumor, every theory. Amateur sleuths built digital maps connecting the victims' last known locations, overlaying timelines with lunar cycles and police radio frequencies. Each attempt to impose logic only deepened the mystery. The case refused to resolve. It lived in the space between fact and legend. Filmmakers found poetry in the silence. The Colonial Parkway became a setting, an atmosphere, a metaphor. Indie thrillers borrowed its name. Ghost hunters claimed to record whispers along the route. The overlook where Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski died became a stop for paranormal tours. Tour guides told stories of phantom headlights that appear in the fog, following drivers before vanishing into the night. "It's not haunted by ghosts," one said. "It's haunted by questions." For the communities that grew up around Williamsburg, Yorktown, and Newport News, the case became both warning and inheritance. Parents told their children not to stop for flashing lights unless they could see a marked patrol car. Couples avoided the parkway altogether. Even decades later, the road carried an aura of dread. Some refused to drive it at all. Others did so deliberately, testing courage, courting superstition. "You don't look in your mirrors on the parkway," locals say. "You might see someone behind you who isn't there." Culturally, the Colonial Parkway Murders joined the pantheon of American unsolved horrors. Names like Zodiac, Texarkana, and Gilgo. Each represented a moment when society realized that safety is an illusion. What set the Parkway apart was its intimacy. It wasn't about random violence or urban chaos, but the corruption of something sacred: love, trust, and the quiet of the night. The killer didn't just take lives, he stole the innocence of a region. Yet, for all the sensationalism, the echo of the case remains profoundly human. Every time a new documentary airs, the same faces reappear: the aging parents, the tired detectives, the journalists who can't let go. Their voices tremble not from fear, but from exhaustion, the kind that comes from decades of asking the same question and never hearing an answer. In the absence of truth, stories filled the void. Some say the killer was a ranger who couldn't stand the idea of lovers defiling his parkway. Others believe he was a trucker who prowled the highways at night, luring victims with false authority. A few whisper that he was more than one man, that the Colonial Parkway became a feeding ground for different predators over time. Each theory is a reflection, a way for people to make sense of the senseless. According to official records, the Colonial Parkway murders remain unsolved. But in the echoes that roll through the pines and across the river, the story continues, retold by every generation that dares to drive that road after dark. The false confessions. There is a cruel rhythm to cold cases. The longer they remain unsolved, the more people step forward to claim them. For the Colonial Parkway murders, that rhythm became a chorus of confusion. Over the years, a half-dozen men confessed or were coerced into confessing to crimes they couldn't possibly have committed. Each confession, instead of bringing clarity, only deepened the fog. According to official records, the first confession came in 1991 from a drifter named James McCumber, arrested in Georgia for an unrelated assault. During interrogation, he told police he might have killed some people in Virginia back in the 80s. The story unraveled almost immediately. McCumber had been serving time in Florida when the first murders occurred. But his words made headlines. And for a moment, the Bureau dared to hope. Then came the forensics, and the hope dissolved again. Years later, a man named Frank Deke Holloway, a convicted sex offender, wrote a letter to the FBI claiming responsibility for the Parkway killings and others like them. When agents flew to interview him, Holloway wept through the confession, describing details that seemed intimate: rope burns, a car near the water, the smell of gasoline. But nearly everything he said was lifted from public reports. What wasn't was wrong. Still, the headlines flared again. FBI may have Colonial Parkway killer in custody. A week later, Holloway recanted. He said he only wanted someone to remember his name. By the early 2000s, the confessions had become almost ritualistic, each one another echo in the chamber. A Vietnam veteran claimed he'd been part of a secret government program that cleansed the Parkway. Another man, delusional and unmedicated, told a local reporter that the victims were spies meeting in the woods. Every confession came with its own mythology, and everyone collapsed under scrutiny. The public began to treat them as sideshows, forgetting that behind every false confession was a family forced to relive the pain. The most infamous confession came in 2008, from William Gregory, a truck driver arrested in North Carolina for unrelated homicides. During questioning, he volunteered details eerily similar to the Colonial Parkway cases. Investigators spent months tracing his routes, mapping his logs, cross-referencing time cards with murder dates. The timeline fit too well. When they finally confronted him with the inconsistencies, Gregory smiled. "I just wanted to see if you'd believe me," he said. "You people never did find the real one, did you?" He was later convicted of 2 other murders, but not the Parkway killings. These false confessions became their own form of contamination. The Bureau's files filled with contradictory statements, timelines, and composite sketches drawn from imagination. Some agents privately suspected that the real killer might be among the confessors, hiding behind deliberate lies. "If he's smart," said one profiler, He'll confess and make it sound crazy. That's how you disappear in plain sight. But others saw a different truth, a reflection of collective guilt. The Parkway had infected the psyche of an entire region, and the confessions were symptoms of that infection. Men who wanted to matter, to be feared, to attach themselves to a legend, stepped into the void left by the faceless predator. It's not that they killed, said a forensic psychologist. It's that they needed to belong to something that felt larger than themselves. In time, even the investigators began to question what a confession was worth. They had learned the hard way that words, like evidence, can lie. The case had become a labyrinth of stories, some true, some false, all incomplete. Truth was no longer a destination, it was a mirage on the horizon. According to official records, every confession was disproven, but those who've heard them all say the same thing. One of them didn't sound like the others, and maybe, just maybe, that was the one they should have believed. The return of the files. In the summer of 2009, a discovery in a forgotten government warehouse reignited one of America's darkest mysteries. It began with a routine audit, an inventory of old case materials stored in an FBI evidence facility in Norfolk, Virginia. Buried among hundreds of unmarked boxes, archivists found several containers labeled only with faded codes: CP86, CP87, CP88, CP89. Inside were crime scene photos, handwritten notes, and evidence logs long believed to have been lost or destroyed. The Colonial Parkway Murders had returned from the grave. According to official records, the boxes were discovered during a relocation of outdated files. The warehouse had been used to store overflow evidence since the 1980s, and much of its cataloging was incomplete. When the boxes were opened, what agents saw inside felt like a time capsule from another era. Polaroids yellowed at the edges, cassette tapes labeled in smudged ink, and field notes written on carbon paper. For years, investigators had worked with copies and fragments. Now, the originals were back. Word spread quickly through the bureau, then through the press. Families of the victims received phone calls they never expected to hear. "We've found something." Reporters gathered outside the Norfolk field office, and within days, the Colonial Parkway Murders were national news again. It was like the dead were whispering through cardboard, one journalist said. Everything they'd lost was suddenly back in the room. Inside the recovered boxes, agents found new, or rather, old clues. Unreleased photos revealed details never before seen publicly. Tire impressions in soft mud near the Nobbling Edwards site. A faint shoe print beside the Dowski-Thomas car, and a blood-stained scrap of fabric from the Phelps Lauer scene. More chilling were the handwritten field notes, containing details that contradicted earlier official reports. One ranger had noted possible fuel residue on victims' hair and skin, a detail absent from FBI summaries. Another sheet, dated October 1986, contained a single cryptic line: "Vehicle may have been impersonating the official car." The rediscovery fueled hope among the families and investigators alike. DNA testing had advanced dramatically since the 1980s, and for the first time, there was the possibility of extracting usable material from preserved fibers and stains. This could change everything, said one cold case analyst. But as the testing began, hope collided once again with disappointment. Decades of poor storage had degraded much of the biological evidence. Humidity of Virginia summers had warped slides, corrupted films, and turned once viable DNA into dust. Still, the recovered files brought renewed attention. The FBI reopened the case under the Cold Case Initiative, a program designed to re-examine unsolved crimes with modern forensic tools. A new team of analysts pored over the materials, scanning, digitizing, and cross-referencing everything. Some claimed to see patterns others had missed, similar handwriting on two unrelated reports, phone numbers that appeared in multiple logs, and a recurring name in the ranger rosters that no one had ever publicly mentioned. "It's all there," one agent whispered, "but it's buried in plain sight." The return of the files also reignited old fears. Some of the original investigators refused to comment. Others openly worried that certain documents had been selectively found. "We don't know how those boxes went missing," said a retired agent. "We don't know why they came back now." The families, too, felt divided. Hope clashed with suspicion. "They're giving us pieces," said Ida Phelps. "Not the truth." As journalists combed through newly released photos, one image stood out: a long, fog-covered stretch of the Colonial Parkway at dawn, taken the morning after the first murders. In the frame, a single figure stands by the roadside, faceless, distant, watching. The photographer had never identified who it was. The caption beneath the photo, written in shaky pen, read only, "Unconfirmed observer." According to official records, the rediscovered evidence was cataloged and preserved. But those who opened the boxes that day say it felt like the parkway itself exhaled, and everything it had buried came alive again. The endless road. Night falls differently on the Colonial Parkway. The pines lean in, the river turns black, and the road hums with a low, eternal sound, the kind of silence that remembers. Decades have passed since the last bodies were found, but to those who drive the parkway after midnight, time feels circular. The air carries the same chill, the same weight of something unfinished. Some say you can still see the glint of headlights reflected in the mist moving just behind you, no matter how fast you go. According to official records, the Colonial Parkway murders remain unsolved. No suspect has ever been charged. The case, technically, is still open, archived, reviewed, revisited, but never closed. Files sit in digital vaults, scanned and cross-referenced, their pages aging in silence. The official narrative speaks of hope, of new technology, of justice waiting just beyond reach. But those who have lived this story know better. Justice is not the same as truth, and truth has long since learned to hide. For the families, the detectives, and the journalists who refuse to forget, the Parkway has become more than geography. It is a state of mind. A reminder that monsters rarely come from the shadows. They come from the places we trust. A uniform, a friendly voice, a badge. Each murder, each unanswered question, eroded something sacred, not just life, but faith in the institutions meant to protect it. The Colonial Parkway did not merely claim victims, it claimed belief itself. In the years since, Virginia has changed. The rest stops have been renovated, new signs warn against stopping at night, and the parkway itself feels wider, cleaner, less intimate. Yet the past clings to it. Tourists drive the route, unaware of the blood beneath the asphalt. Lovers still park by the water, whispering promises into the dark. And sometimes, if they listen closely, they say the air feels wrong, heavy, electric, like the road is watching. For investigators who still revisit the files, the case has become a mirror. Every theory leads to another dead end. Every answer breeds more doubt. The killer's shadow stretches across generations of lawmen, each convinced they are the one who will end it, each swallowed in turn by the same silence. The Parkway doesn't want to be solved, one agent said. It wants to be remembered. And so it is. In books, in podcasts, in the whispered warnings of locals who tell their children never to stop when they see flashing lights. In the quiet rituals of those who still bring flowers to the overlooks. In the uneasy peace of families who have turned grief into endurance. The Parkway endures because forgetting would mean surrendering the only thing left, the story itself. No one knows if the killer is still alive. If he is, he would be an old man now, fading into anonymity. Perhaps he drives that same road, unseen, recalling what he once did there. Perhaps he smiles when he sees the news reruns, the documentaries, the endless speculation. Or perhaps he's long gone, and only his echo remains, woven into the asphalt, into the fog, into the minds of those who still look for patterns in the dark. According to official records, the Colonial Parkway stretches for 23 miles between Jamestown and Yorktown. But to those who know its history, it never really ends. It loops through memory, through fear, through every story we tell to make sense of what cannot be seen. And somewhere out there, on that endless road, America's hidden predator is still waiting.